Season 2.
Season 2, and you know
Cheetah
what?
Dance 1 more year.
Without further ado, I just wanted to get our guest on the show. He's here already. He's the author of two of my favorite books from the early to better days of occultism, The 21st Century Mage and The New Hermetics. Now, one of the things I love about the 21st Century Mage, he took that topic of the abramelin, which so many people get constipated about it, and made it very, very digestible to the public. And because of that, he's been such a great contributor to occult literature for the past couple of years. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our guest, first guest for season 2, the ever so eloquent Mr. Jason Augustus Newcomb. Mr. Newcomb, welcome to magick.tv.
Thank you so much for having me, and such a nice, warm welcome.
Well, thank you for all the work that you've done. And sorry about the gremlins, but I mean, you know, like it's like Wade taught me early in my magical career the term astral opposition. And when we had our first episode of magick.tv, a lot of gremlins were getting in the way. So now it's season 2. This is the first episode. We weren't expecting anything less. So we're going to start the show with, tell us about you, Mr. Newcomb. I mean, what inspired you to take on the monumental task of not only making Hermetics, a very obscure topic to many, more digestible, but also taking the legendary abramelin and turning it into this amazing piece of work, the 21st Century Mage?
Well, thank you again. The story of my life is actually a pretty long story at this point, since I've been doing this for 30-something years at this point. But basically, when I was about 11 years old, I discovered the tarot, and that led me into New Age and magical bookstores, and I started exploring, you know, various topics from witchcraft to you know, alchemy and so forth. And one of the things that really caught my eyes was the work of Aleister Crowley, who I've somewhat, I don't know, I don't want to say distance myself from, but I'm less and less influenced by him at this point than I was back then. But you know, he was very much an early inspiration, and I'm sure has trickled into everything, even what I'm doing at this point in some ways or other. But basically, I started working with that sort of magic, and I met, you know, the local community that was on that wavelength, and we did ritual together. And one of the things that I noticed was that a lot of people were avoiding kind of the hard stuff that I was doing at home on my own. And so both of those books that you introduced there are books that I created essentially in the hopes that I would encourage people to start exploring the sort of deeper aspects of things, the magic that's designed for transcending one's ego boundaries and moving into spaces that are more mystical in their you know, experience and in their development of your perception of your true existence, rather than simply the ego consciousness that we normally associate with ourselves. So those books were my early foray into that, and I mean, since then I've done just a million other things too. So,
Yeah. So I've some of your other works, but these are the top, my favorite of all of your stuff.
Well, I mean, I've written a bunch of other books. I've written a book called The Book of Magic Power. I've written a book on Enochian magic called Practical Enochian Magic. I've written a book on sexual magic that is called Sexual Sorcery. It's my other Wiser book. Those two books were published by Wiser, and Sexual Sorcery was the last one. And then I moved on to my own independent publishing and have been publishing. I've got I don't know, just too many to list at this point. For the past several years, though, I've been more and more making things. So I sell, first of all, these banners behind me are something that I make. And actually the one right here of Ra or Frey or Horus, or however you want to look at this particular image, is part of a set of tarot cards that I created last year, called the Tarot of the Greek Magical Papyri, or the PGM Tarot. And this is available in my Etsy shop right now, and it's something that it's a very much a passion project of mine, and it did surprisingly well. And right now I'm actually promoting a new project that I just created, which is a little bit of an innovation in the field of tarot. It's a set of dice that have the Marseille tarot on them. That it's they're sort of simplified images of the tarot, but here's one. I'll just pluck it out so you can see there's the two of coins, and the what is that? That's the that's strength. So I mean, you know, they're they're cool dice, and there's a lot of innovative ways in which you can use them that are quite different from normal tarot readings. First of all, you can do a three-dimensional readings or stacked readings, and so there's a lot of like different things that you could do with them that you can't do with cards. So they're very cool, and there's a Kickstarter right now. If people want to go check it out, just dicereading.com takes you to that. The Kickstarter project right now is redirecting to that. So
amazing.
So
I'd like to ask you a question, if you don't mind me asking, Mr. Newcomb. It's about the 21st Century Mage. Because before this came out, there was pretty much only one public way of doing the Abramelin. That was either the Mathers or the Von Worms edition. Then here comes this new guy, and now he's telling the different sides of the world that, well, you don't necessarily need to do it the old school way. You can do it this way. Did you meet any opposition from old school occultists saying, like, how dare you, you whippersnapper? How dare you corrupt our Abramelin system?
No, that's happened more recently than in the past. In the past, the Abramelin operation, at the time that I wrote the book, the Abramelin operation was viewed as something that was, nearly impossible for anyone to do, and something that should be put off as long as possible, and just keep doing the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram for a while longer. So the thing about the Abramelin operation is there's really two different things that are called the Abramelin operation. One is what is specifically described in that grimoire, of which there are now 2 editions. Shortly after my book came out, the George Dane publication of a different manuscript of the book came out, and it has slightly different rules, a somewhat longer procedure even than the one that is described in the Mathers version. But that grimoire tradition wasn't really being operated in any kind of practical way, at least not by anyone that I was aware of. Now there are some people who are saying that they've done it the traditional way, and their claims can be examined on the merits of the fruits of that. I don't know, so but my version of the Abramelin operation, which isn't really my version, is based on the fact that the Golden Dawn had a conceptual similarity to what was being operated upon in that grimoire, that within their ritual framework. So they had the idea that basically the Abramelin operation was an early version of what they were doing in their school. And so Aleister Crowley, when he was creating his sort of curriculum for teaching, he incorporated that concept even more directly and called the work that you do as an Adeptus Minor the Abramelin operation, even though what he was suggesting to do was somewhat different than what the grimoire proposes. And so now, I mean, that's at this point, it's that idea is over 125 years old, to call what the sort of Golden Dawn version of is the Abramelin operation. And so there's some fighting that goes on about whether that should be considered to be the same thing or not. And I don't really care to join the fight. It doesn't really matter to me. But the book that I've written is really more geared towards that Golden Dawn Western mystery tradition initiatory version of the Abramelin operation, rather than the grimoire itself. Although I do make a lot of references to the grimoire and use the grimoire as sort of a framework in which to sort of conceive what you're doing, but really the goal is slightly different, which is to get in touch with your daemon, your divine genius, rather than simply to get in touch with an angel. That might be a similarly conceived thing, but more within a specifically religious framework, whereas my version is not necessarily particularly religious in its outlook. And obviously, since you've read the book, you know that I suggest a number of different approaches to it, involving anything from yoga meditation to just simply visualization exercises and so forth. It's not that you aren't necessarily, like the Abramelin operation itself is something that involves daily constant prayer, examination of religious books, and sort of isolation. Although I think that isolation is somewhat exaggerated in people's minds rather than what the text specifically says. But
I recall something you said in your book that, like, if it was one of the misnomers that if you did the Abramelin, you wouldn't be allowed to bathe and have to keep away from people. But you said, if you don't bathe, people would keep away from you anyway. That was one of the early, like, what the hell? Wait, I have another question I wanted to ask you. When I was still coming up, actually, I scoured Manila for this book, the New Hermetics, and I could
Really?
never find it. I had to go back to Vegas to get a copy. Now, one thing you said, Crowley definitely was one of your early inspirations, but for the New Hermetics, I also noticed that there was actually some of Barden's work here. Aside from Crowley, was there any inspiration you had from other occultists like Franz Barden and etc. when you created this text?
Sure. I mean, Franz Barden, yes. The the other sort of Golden Dawn writers within the body of the Golden Dawn was an influence. I mean, there have been but I mean, I would say the more significant influences on that book are actually very modern people whose work is not necessarily even magical in their minds, although they do somewhat view it that way. Like Richard Bandler and John Grinder, who created a neurolinguistic program.
Yeah.
So those are, I mean, definitely Barden is in there because I think that one of the real things that Barden introduces to occultism, which I do think was actually more traditional than some people view it. From what I see that there was a tradition that involved more consciousness change within Germanic circles that we didn't get quite as much in England and France, which are the major influences on American occultism. But Barden introduces a series of practices that are really focused on concentration and consciousness, which are somewhat influenced by, at least in his descriptions, influenced by Eastern practices, by Indian practices, and that's probably somewhat related to the Theosophical Society, which had a huge influence in European occultism in the generation previous to him, and then it also probably is some influx of Indian occultism that was coming in through various people who were traveling the world and spreading that technology around. So Barden has a more technological approach to things, which is something that I'm very into. Although I do think that, and in fact, I noticed that I recently, well, not recently, 10 years ago or so, I read a book by a person who was a Barden, I can't remember his name. I'm sorry. He was a Barden, follower who significantly reduced the thresholds of what Barden suggests. He suggests being able to concentrate unbrokenly for 5 minutes or maybe more on a single object without any break in your concentration, and that's a pretty big ask for anybody. I mean, even a Tibetan monk would have some trouble doing that, in the first several years of their practice, and that's one of the early exercises in the book. So there's kind of like this hurdle of impossibility that is thrown at the practitioner in some places. So but the idea of putting that into your practice in a very organized way was pretty interesting to me on Barden's behalf. Crowley suggests similar things, but he sort of leaves them in passing and doesn't give you any sort of a benchmark for them per se. Little ones here and there, but for the most part, he leaves it in the hands of your superior in the order to decide whether you've mastered the subject or not, which is a rather dangerous thing to do, considering that it's pretty easy to have a superior in the order who's not very nice or very knowledgeable themselves. So anyway,
this is going to add me to my next question, because I just realized I didn't even know that you actually had your PGM tarot, and now I'll be ordering that from you today. But what I wanted to also know is, how has your work with the PGM been lately, and has this helped you develop a deeper relationship with the Greco-Roman gods like Thoth, or maybe others like Anubis or Sobek? Have these helped you grow in connecting with these old deities? Is this something you're doing lately? Please share.
So, I mean, I've spent most of my life basically as one of those magicians who doesn't have a really religious component to what it is that I do, largely just because I sort of have always been I guess what they would call it is in today's modern sort of pejorative terms, a Neoplatonist, and that I've sort of seen the one as the thing that is the goal. And so those intermediary intelligences have sort of seemed to me to be a distraction from that. But yes, as a result of as a result of them coming to me more than me coming to them, I've been sort of called by them to do a number of things, and so yes, my relationship with them has very much become more of a peer, and that's an inappropriate word. I'm acting as a conduit for some things. That the PGM tarot really was something that kind of was given to me more than that I chose to do it. It just sort of started happening, and more that's the way that almost everything that I do at this point. I just sort of sit back and I'm just a silly doofusy guy, and then something comes through me and I just start creating these things. And
is there an Anubis card in that deck? I'm just curious because I'm an Anubis patron, so
there is actually. So let me tell you a little bit of the story about the PGM tarot. So I got inspired to do it because I've been studying it a little bit more, largely because I'm always interested in finding connections between Eastern and Western practices. And I noticed in the PGM there was some breathing practices, and I just started like diving into it more and more deeply to see what sort of technological things were present within the Greek magical papyri. And I've done a whole a quite extensive sort of categorizing and modeling of things that are going on in the PGM technologies, which I have a course in which I've talked about it, but I think there will be a book that's actually even more in depth at some point in the future about sort of what they were doing, what was similar about what they were doing, and what we as modern people can kind of derive from that and utilize in our work, both from a spiritual perspective, but also from a consciousness and magical technological perspective. But yeah, so I started making the PGM tarot, and sort of the ones that fit with the major arcana of the tarot came rather quickly, and in fact I found Greek vase art that very much resembled a lot of the tarot imagery really quickly, and I was just like, wow, this is just meant to be. This is really these archetypes are present within this Greek pottery in a really interesting way. So I started doing that, and then when I started the campaign, I was conscious of the fact that because of the choices that I'd made in terms of the imagery of the tarot, there were a number of things that were not present. First of all, there were no Egyptian gods in it per se, although in the Greek magical papyri, they're frequently referenced as the same thing. Like, for instance, Ra and Helios are essentially this. They're sometimes mentioned, one after the other. So they're considered to be the same entity, despite the fact that some people today might not want those kind of conflations going on. But they certainly were at that time period. But so I was aware of that fact, and I was also aware that, for instance, there are 12 Olympians, and I think I had 8 or 9 of them in it. So I was leaving out a bunch of the Olympians from the thing, just because I only had 22 cards to work with, and there were there are 7 gods that are sort of somewhat related to the planets, and I only had 6 of them in the trump. So In the campaign, I said, basically, if we raise X amount of money, I will add some additional cards to it that sort of fill in those gaps. Mm-hmm. And so that and those were at stretch goals, and we reached those stretch goals like super fast. Within a week, I was suddenly responsible for making 22 more images. So the deck actually has 100 cards in it rather than 78. So it's got 8 Egyptian gods, 8 additional Greek gods in it, and then some of the daemons or gods that are just sort of in the PGM, like the headless one and Abrasax and those sorts of things. So the deck has a lot of imagery in it that's extra, and what I suggest that people do is that they sort of, if they're going to use it as a divinatory deck, that they sort of pare it down. They don't have to pare it down to 78 per se. That's a totally arbitrary thing, but pare it down a little bit from 100, because some of them are somewhat repetitive. For instance, Helios and Ra, and then there's Amun and Zeus, and so I mean, like, I would recommend sort of choosing one of those to be your and Thoth and Hermes are both in there. So I'm trying to look for Anubis while we're talking. So the deck is interesting in a lot of ways. It's got I did some sort of things that were more for me than for anybody else. Like for instance, the cards. Here's just this is Selene, and as you can see, it doesn't have a number on it, and it doesn't have the name of a tarot card on it. Although she represents the moon in my sort of initial organization of the deck. I specifically didn't want to force that upon people, and also I wanted this to be able to be something that you could utilize in a ritual, and not have the tarot imagery or numbers getting in the way of you just connecting with it as an image. So the other thing is the numbered cards all have talismans from the PGM at the top, and then sort of a tableau that's kind of like a Greek vase painting that represents the thing, and then it's got actually a little oracle saying at the bottom that is from something in the PGM called the Homer Oracle, which takes little passages from the Odyssey and the I'm blanking on the other one, the Iliad, excuse me.
Iliad.
It just utilizes them as a little divinatory thing in a similar sense to sort of the way that you might use the Bible for bibliomancy. You open up to a random page and you point to a text, and that's a message for you. Well, they gathered together like 200 and something of those and put them into a thing, and then you did some sort of a dice roll to choose which one that you would be looking at. Very common oracle practice at that time.
Does the deck have a magical component to it? Like, does it have its own rituals that come with the book, with the deck? Like
I mean, the deck itself comes with a very simple explanation that just sort of gives meanings for the cards and tiny little suggestion on how you might want to read them. It's literally just two pieces of papyrus that a two-sided piece of papyrus. But there's a book that sort of goes along with it, and that has actually a ritual in it for pretty much every one of the small cards. There's like a ritual practice type. That was another thing that was part of the expanded the stretch goals. I had quite a few stretch goals, and they literally all got we got to all of them, and I added some more. I think we might have reached one more stretch goal after the initial ones. I'm not sure if we did though. So I mean, the book has been expanded. It's got a list. It's not a super detailed list, but it's got a list of every material component that is present in the Greek magical card. That's one of my nerdy research things. I wrote down every single thing, from pieces of stone to different kinds of animals and so forth that are their various parts are used in rituals. So that's an appendix to the book. But yeah, there's a lot of magical work within it, including a ritual for consecrating the cards if you want to take a magical approach to consecrating the cards, and then a bunch of other rituals for all, basically the standard things that rituals are for: love and success.
And these are available on your website, right? So I could purchase the ritual book with the deck on your website.
They're not available. They're not available in my website, which is kind of it still works, but I haven't been able. I haven't updated it in a while. If you go to JasonAugustusNewcomb.com, there's a link to my Etsy shop right there on the first page. So after you get past the request to sign up for my mailing list, which I suggest everybody do, you get to a page that has a number of different things, and one of them right in the middle is my Etsy shop, and that's where those are sold. On the other hand, the new dice ones, those are that's dicereading.com, or it's on Kickstarter. So if you want to go through the trouble of looking for the Kickstarter thing, you can. But dicereading.com takes you right to it. So what was that question? It's available. Yeah, it's what's that?
If we could get the ritual book with the deck.
Yeah, so I mean, on Etsy, I have, you can get just the book, you can get just the deck, or you can get them together.
Amazing. All right. So that's actually pretty interesting to see that you've not only given such amazing contributions to the study of ritual magic through the new Hermetics and the Enochian and even the Abramelin approach, but you've even gone as far as to make your own contributions with the PGM and, of course, with your tarot deck. And I'm really eager to get my hands on those. So yeah, the next thing we're going to talk about now is Mr. Newcomb.
I wanted to go back to one of the books for a second.
Go right ahead.
When you were doing you were writing the book about the Abramelin ritual, did you get perspectives from other cultures, like from the Amakua, or was it pretty much just the European versions of that spiritual process?
To be honest with you, the depth and breadth of my personal research into occultism and magic was somewhat more limited when I wrote that book. I was in my 20s when I wrote it, and it was in the late 1990s that I did my own Abra Malin operation, and so I mean it was a long time ago that was created. So no, there's not really a whole lot outside of the bubble of Western occultism, Golden Dawn oriented Western occultism. Although a few other, like he said, I was already reading Barton at that time, so there's a few other outside of that particular ethos things in there. But the truth is that the book is written with a pretty universal attitude. So I don't know that those elements would have been at home within it, but they aren't necessary to understand what it is that I was trying to get across. It's not really about trying to rationalize Western practices in comparison with others. It was more just to say, here's how to actually do Western practices that aren't necessarily even Western. They're just the practice of what it is that we do in order to get beyond our ego consciousness. And here's some different ways of approaching it, but ultimately the goal is one. The methods are many, or the methods are one. The goal is many. You can look at it either way, but both are true. There's no absolutes in these things. I don't really think anymore.
Totally agree with you on that one.
Now, when you complete the working though, that's usually like a very. Did you have like how seismic was your lifestyle change after you completed that, and what advice would you give to other people who are doing it?
Well, I wouldn't say my lifestyle changed. Certainly, my consciousness changed, and my feeling of being at cause for the events in life certainly diminished, and I realized that that the bigger picture is somewhat different than what we imagine. I don't have any issue with people wanting to utilize magical technologies for sort of getting things in their lives, but I think if that's your sole focus, it's kind of like digging around in the scraps and the garbage behind the mansion rather than walking into the mansion that you own and just enjoying the truth, which has nothing to do with this material world whatsoever. And so lifestyle seems almost things over the course of my life. My lifestyle has changed significantly because I got married and I have children, and that was probably a more seismic lifestyle change, but my inner life certainly was transformed dramatically by that operation, and the recognition of the truth of a lot of what the ancient teachers and philosophers were sharing, and the fact that it is simpler and less ornate than some people would like to make it, and requires a lot less stuff.
Yeah, for the ritual itself, anyway.
What's that?
For the working itself, anyway. I mean, the original book was written when it was possible for a person to just take 6 months and go live in a hermitage.
Are you asking about my lifestyle during the operation?
Well, like after you attain, there's all. I mean, we still have to live in a regular world. Mm-hmm. But but now you're different on the inside, and your outside still has to maintain a certain amount of presence in the. I mean, if you're juggling and someone throws you a new ball, you still have to keep the other balls in the air, and it's usually a pretty big adjustment. Well, so I was just wondering if you had any advice for people who are about to do this and don't quite realize what they're getting into.
Well, what I would say most definitely is that there's an initial sense that everything is going to be different, and that you are different fundamentally from the way that you were before. But this particular practice is really something that's early in the phase of sort of spiritual development. So that initial sense tends to fade, and you really need to keep moving forward, or you do sort of regress back into normal consciousness, which I've done. I mean, normal consciousness I'm not. It's difficult to speak about these things because they don't really operate in the same environment as day-to-day life. That initial sort of realization, that initial connection with that divine consciousness is something that uplifts you and transforms you, and in some ways you don't ever change from that, because you've realized something that it fundamentally changes your outlook on things in the world and the universe. But on the other hand, you do still have to sort of continue going to your job or whatever it is that you do on a day-to-day basis. And so there's a
or sometimes you don't.
What's that?
Or sometimes you don't. I mean, when I did mine, I lost everything. I let go of everything.
If you're familiar with the story of Buddha, when he got his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, he said he could have just stayed in the jungle, but he realized he had to go back to the world and bring those secrets into the world. So I guess it's kind of like the reconnecting of the top to the bottom, the as above, the so below, that now that you're enlightened, it's not for you, it's for you to serve mankind with.
Right. Well, I mean, I would argue that what the Buddha attained under the Bodhi tree was significantly different than the Abramelin operation, because he'd already attained those things that are encompassed within the Abramelin operation much earlier in his life, in which he mastered jhana at various different levels, and so what was already in touch with his holy guardian angel in the way that we think about it, and in touch with all sorts of other spiritual entities on a regular basis. But what he wanted to do was to completely get past all of the karmic bonds that we have. And so under the Bodhi tree was a different operation, more akin, but I wouldn't say exactly the same, to the master of the temple, the crossing the abyss metaphor that we have in Western occultism. Would be closer to what it was that he achieved under the Bodhi tree, eliminating any vestiges of your previous self, which is a different working.
I stand corrected. So anyhow, this is where we're going to go now to the current event segment of the show, where I'd like to know, Mr. Newcomb, I mean, you've been teaching people, you have had courses. I remember I heard you on Thelema Coast to Coast in the 90s, and you've made so many contributions to the practice. Now, Wade and I talk back and forth about how we feel sometimes the standards of occultism are waxing and waning. Sometimes it's more available, but there's so many witch talkers out there that it's kind of bastardizing the hard work we put into it back in the day. So I just wanted to ask you, what's your stance on magic and occultism, or like what's your observation? How do you see the practices as of today from your perspective? Is it getting better, worse? Please share your take on things.
I think in a lot of ways things are getting better, honestly, because people have more access to information more easily. Unfortunately, that comes with a downside, which is that people very often believe themselves to be experts in something without really having very much experience in it at all, simply because they read about it on the internet, and they read 10 different blogs on the subject, so now suddenly they're a leading thought leader. I also think that there's a significant amount more arrogance on the part of some people who post on social media. There are a lot of people who really, who just say very cruel and silly things that don't really serve anyone. And I'm sure that there are people on both sides of any argument that could agree with me on that. So, there are people who feel that that everything should be simple and easy, and anyone who isn't that way is an idiot. And there are people who think that if you don't follow these specific rules that sometimes are written about in various places, then you're not doing things correctly. And they're very sort of argumentative and battle oriented within a very small community. I mean, there really aren't all that many of us people who are
we were having a conversation earlier.
What's that?
We were having that exact conversation earlier, that people with the information age now, with social media especially, you can just pontificate, and anyone who disagrees with you, that's taken as an attack or a challenge. Mm-hmm. But then they can just block you, dismiss you, delete your comments, and then they can kind of continue with their own fallacy as if their ideas were never challenged. And personally, I love having my ideas challenged, because that's the only way you ever learn anything. Sure. Is if someone can come up, say, if you say, okay, idea A, someone else comes up with, well, what about idea X? And you're like, block. And you don't have to deal with idea X, even though it's a very real thing. I mean, maybe they were misled and just didn't understand, or maybe they had a very valid statement to address what you had said, something you hadn't thought of. And you block out the opportunity to learn new things, because that's the only way that your ideas evolve. That's the only way your understanding evolves, is if you have an idea and it's challenged and you overcome it or adapt it.
Yeah, like another thing I want to throw down, like what Jason said about like the information is more available, but that cuts both ways, because like I said, I told you the story of what I went through to get my copy of this. So I treasure these books, but there are a lot of douchebags out there who can download an illegal copy of this book. And the thing about it is, they'll never freaking read it. They'll just, okay,
yeah,
got it.
That is the funny thing, that we can find so many things and just fill up our computers with various junk that we never look at. And I do think when someone illegally downloads my stuff, chances are it's just going to sit in their hard drive and they're not going to look at it. But I would say that more people have looked at my materials illegally than legally, most likely.
Seems to happen to the best of us, actually.
It's a big downside of the information age, is that information is too available. But it's not as if they're obtaining the benefits from it for free. They're just getting a copy to read someday, and it just kind of sits and collects dust.
One of the things that I've done really from very early on in when I was actually offering things in the occult marketplace, but even more so today, is that I've tried to make a lot of practical tools for people to work with. So I make magical circles that you can lay out on the floor, and I make scrying kits that you can utilize to explore visionary magic. So by offering those things, I'm trying to make it so that people can actually do more occultism than talk about it on the internet and even read about it, because you can do these things in a literary sense.
Remember the old Infocom games like Zork 1 and Enchanter? Remember the text games? They had a way of preventing people from making illegal copies. That they would have what they called feelies in the box when you bought the game. So like you'd start your game off, and then you'd say encounter a chest, and there's 3 pictures on the front. You'd have to go to your feelie, and that would give you the combination to open the chest and actually continue with the game. So if you had, like with your book, you're like, oh yeah, in the actual book, it comes boxed with this little decoder set in the decoder wheel, and then they have to actually do that in order to read the book. It's like your Ovaltine decoder ring to actually read the books that they would have to have.
That sounds fun. I had a friend who suggested, he was in publishing, he suggested the possibility of publishing a book that had an entirely different book printed in ultraviolet ink, so that you could only read it if you had one of those ultraviolet lights, and it would have a completely different text that made the first text make sense. So there you go. It seemed like
you hold it up to the sunlight and you read the one line and then the other line through it, and then after
right, and then it combines together. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of fun ways of approaching that kind of thing. But I think, unfortunately, Aaron Leach likes to say that he enjoys the illegal copy of, I don't remember which one, something on Enochian, because it has a bunch of, the person has gone through and put a bunch of like links in it, so you can just go to the table of contents and get right where you want to go. And he's like, I use it all the time, even though it's illegal. It's also, I think that if you have a lot of other things going on besides just your books, then your books then ultimately just become sort of a marketing tool for everything else that you're doing.
And it's the world we live in now, so you have to kind of incorporate the idea of illegal downloading in with your book, to the point, like you're saying, like having the links to go from one section to another. There was a lot of music CDs now will come with extras. When you pop it into your computer, it's got all of the other, all the other, it's got like videos, lyrics, all these other things that you're not going to get if you just download the music. That you'd actually have to have the physical disc in order to do it. So, I mean, there's ways to do it, to incorporate that into it. If some people just want the text, that's one thing, but they're not going to be getting the full experience unless they get the book.
The first time that I saw that someone had made an illegal copy of the new Hermetics, that was the first one that I saw on the internet. I felt a little disheartened by it, just because, you know, it's such a, like I said, it's such a small community. It's not like, you know, anyone's making millions of dollars off of these things. You know, it's not like some big corporation that you're stealing from. It's a pretty small thing that you're now making free. But then I kind of got over it and let it go, and you know, just sort of rolled with it. The thing that actually bummed me out the most was I've made hundreds of audio meditations where some of the new Hermetics practices have audio recordings to go with them, and then I've just made a bunch of other things, and I incorporate a bunch of like different sound technologies that I've developed over the years, studying like the Robert Monroe binaural stuff and like different tones and stuff. But I've invested a huge amount of time in them, and then when I started seeing those around on the internet being stolen, it kind of bummed me out, because like that was so much more work and so much more of my heart put into them. And again, it's not like there's a lot of money that's being made off of them to begin with, so it just sort of but again, I mean, there's really nothing I can do about it. So you can't, I mean, holding on to anger about that stuff is really a very useless thing.
Well, the good karma will come back to you 100-fold. I mean, you're sharing this knowledge, which is really adding to a lot of people, uplifting their lives through your work, written and through your practical work. And if some people are going to be butt pirates about it and steal your life's work, then that's for them to pay to the piper at the end of the day. You're a messenger of a divine message, and people need to hear that. And like I said, I had the option of getting, you know, of course, like you said, you could be a jerk and just download stuff, but I said, no, this is a good book. I believe in the topic. I'm gonna track it down. And at the time, around, that was like early 2000s, occult books in the Philippines were very rare. So I was slap happy when I got my hands on both of your books, and I've really taken them seriously. I mean, it's like, especially the 21st Century Mage, it's one of the more digestible versions of that procedure. So at the end of the day, I'll just let you know that you've done a good job in reaching the right people. So with that being said, Mr. Newcomb, what we're going to do right now, we're going to go to the Occult X segment of the show, where we, the viewers, learn something from you. You can teach us right now anything you want. Like I said, sky's the limit. And this is just us learning something from you. Could be anything. Could be a practice. Like even Lon Milo Duquette taught us how to glaze our tarot cards with wax paper. It was like the Lon taught us how to do that. I was expecting some grand summoning, but okay, I'll take the tarot glazing. But like, I'd like us to learn something from you today. So what have you got available for us today?
Well, I actually am a person who is sort of a magical technologist. How much time do we have for this segment?
All the time you need.
Okay. One of the things that I think is missing from a lot of people's magical abilities is the ability to perceive things on the inner planes in a facile way, in a way that, you know, is relatively easy to get to. There's been a tremendous amount of stuff written about in the occult literature about opening the third eye, and you know, some people are visionaries and some people are not visionaries. The truth is that we are all visionaries at all times. There's always things that we're receiving subtly, both in our physical bodies, or I would say our etheric bodies, our the energy of our bodies, as well as things that are coming into our visionary perceptual places. Most people who feel like they aren't visionary, there's two things that they're doing. One, they're negating things that are coming to them because they don't feel like they're important. They don't seem like they're magical enough to be important. And two, they are doing things really quickly in their minds. They're very focused on the thinking aspect of things, rather than the intuitive aspect of things, and so visions tend to come to them in quick flashes that are easy to dismiss, as I mentioned a moment ago. So there's a practice that I developed. It was originally inspired by the work of an author who wrote it's called the Einstein Factor, I believe. And the practice is called image streaming. And what I realized when I was working with a group of people and we were doing a visionary practice, we did things like path working various tarot cards, or invoking an Enochian entity of some sort, or evoking an Enochian, one of the squares of the tablets, and traveling through. And when we did it in a group setting, I found that not only myself, but pretty much everyone else had a pretty good experience of having something visionary happen in those spaces. But then myself and others, I noticed when they were doing it by themselves, when I was doing it by myself, and reports of others of them doing it by themselves, they had a lot more trouble doing it. And at first we were thinking maybe it was, sort of group energy dynamics or something like that. But then after reading this book, The Einstein Factor, I realized it literally was because we were speaking aloud to somebody what we were experiencing, and that unfolded the vision more than if you're just by yourself, not interacting with another person. The vision tends to become more vague because of the fact that your consciousness is just moving in other directions. By having a purpose to communicate what you're experiencing to another person, you are much more able to stay connected with what it is that your vision is happening. So I have to warn you, I just got a notification on my phone that my battery's about to die. Jennifer, do you think you could try and get a plug? But so if this ends suddenly, I apologize.
Okay.
And I do teach courses on this in a more detailed way. So I'm going to give you the simple basics of what it is that you need to do to sort of activate your visionary sense in a fairly simple and straightforward way.
Okay.
And you can do this without having any particular ritual in mind. But if you do it while you're in a ritual, you'll find yourself connecting very deeply with what it is you're doing. And first, so there's really three components to it. The three components to it are that you open yourself to whatever vision comes in. That's not one of the three. But first, you open yourself to just whatever comes in, you're going to interact with. And if we close our eyes, let's have everyone close their eyes for a second and take, 3 or 4 deep breaths. I'm just plugging in right here. If we can maintain the connection across time and space.
Oh, plug that in, and then I'll get this.
Can you plug it in? I think I can reach it with it. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Keep your eyes closed. No, I'm just kidding. You can open them for a second. We'll start over. The lovely Jennifer assisting us.
Yay.
Is that?
Stay relaxed.
Is it actually plugged in? There we go. Wait. There we go. All right. We're back in business. Unlimited power until it all goes away. So there are 3 things that you need to do, and if you're going to do this practice with me right now, you're just going to have to kind of pretend that you're doing one of them. Although I will ask you to do it in actuality. Don't just pretend in your mind. Pretend it actually. And so the three factors are that you describe whatever you're experiencing in your mind, whatever vision comes to you. You're describing it in the present tense. I am seeing some sparkles behind my closed eyes. I am seeing a teddy bear appearing for a moment. You say it in the present tense. Then you describe it with more than one sense. In other words, you describe what it looks like, but then you also try and perceive a sense of smell of it. You try and touch it and feel what the texture of it is like, and describe that aloud in the present tense as well. So, for instance, if that teddy bear popped into your mind, the teddy bear smells somewhat old and mildewy. I'm touching it, and it feels sort of like a lamb's wool, and I squeeze it and it makes a squeaky sound. You get all of your senses involved in it, and then once whatever you're experiencing is going on, you can look around that whatever thing you've just had pop into your mind, look around it and see what context it's in, and start describing that as well. The teddy bear is sitting in a room, it's sitting on a brown table, et cetera, et cetera. And just allow that stream of visionary energy to come through you. And the last important part, and I'll go over these three again because I've been kind of meandering. The last part is that you need to describe it to somebody. Now that somebody can be someone who's sitting with you, and that's really the technology that's going on when you're in a group ritual setting, is that you are with somebody, and so whatever you're experiencing and sharing is coming and has a witness, or you're using some sort of recording device. And for a lot of people who don't have a partner to work with, a recording device works quite well. And you know, at this point in our lives, almost everybody has a recording device that they carry around with them at almost all times. So it's not really a difficult thing. You should have an audio record function on your phone, and you're recording, and you are and this recording that you're making, if there isn't an actual person there, if you're making a recording, should be considered something that you are documenting an experience that could be important. So you're trying to share it. Now I'm going to give these steps again in a moment, and we'll just briefly go through it, at least in a pretend sense right here and now. But I want to mention that some people find speaking to be a little challenging at first because they feel like they're not going into a deep enough state in order to really have a visionary senses if they're talking. But that's actually not true at all. What's happening if you're having trouble is that you're not allowing the process to just happen. You're expecting something slightly different. One of the great challenges that people who have trouble with visions have is that they're looking for something that is more than what it is that they normally experience, rather than just contenting themselves with what they're currently experiencing and allowing it to become deeper and fuller as it moves along. They're waiting for that important thing to begin. So if your vision starts with very meager, just barely perceiving things, just go with that and continue to just sort of work with whatever it is that you're experiencing, and it will develop over time. And once you get more into the space where you're seeing panoramic images, you can then move to more important things simply by sort of opening a portal to somewhere else, or imagining a symbol that will lead you to where it really is you want to go, or simply just calling out, hey, this environment that I'm in, where's Hermes here? I was trying to contact Hermes, and then that is going that connection is going to happen at that point. So what I want to ask you to do is, and don't worry about feeling silly about it, because chances are you're by yourself right now, so it doesn't really matter. But so allow yourself to just speak aloud. Now, you hosts, I don't know if you want to speak aloud right now, because you'll be speaking over, you know, it'll be everyone. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. Which one of you two would like to have a vision right now? Let's just do it that way, and forget about the audience. Sorry, guys. You can work on this at home, or you can take my course if you want to. But which one of you would like to just like open up the visionary space? Which one of you is worse at it? Okay. So I can't really see you that well. You're tiny because I'm looking at my my phone screen. So you're about 1 centimeter big right now. So. Oh, there we go. Okay, so go ahead and close your eyes. And I want you to take a number of really nice, deep, smooth breaths, like all the way down into your bottom of your belly, all the way up to the top of your chest. Really deep breath. Breathe in, breathe out, and breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And continue breathing like this. And I want you to just begin to observe that space behind your closed eyes, and notice that it's really an infinite space that extends out in every direction. You can even see behind you and above you and below you all at the same time. There's really no limit to your consciousness in this space. So I want you to just observe that space and just let me know what it is that you're seeing when you see any object appearing.
Seeing a very clear image of a caduceus, but it's made
Okay.
of
Made of what?
A caduceus of Hermes.
Okay, and it's made of what?
It's made of stone, but it's green.
Okay, I want you to reach out with an imaginary hand and feel the texture of it. What does it feel like?
It's rough. It's really like made of green marble.
Okay, and what kind of details do you see on it?
It's very ornate. Like it's been very carefully crafted, and it's cold to the touch, but it's rough. It's so detailed. Like somebody spent so much time chipping away at this that it's like it's a piece of art.
I want you to reach your imaginary nose out to it and see what it smells like.
Roses.
Interesting.
Like roses.
Now I want you to look around where this caduceus is and see what setting it's in.
It's literally propped up at the edge of a beach. It's kind of like a beachhead, like a beacon or something, or like a how do I say, some sort of like, yeah, beacon. It's like it's right there on the beach. Like it's the first thing you see. It's like behind me is just land, and then in front of me is like the beach. It's like right there in the middle of the beach, like right before the water and the land.
Can you reach out and touch the sand?
Yeah.
And how about, can you go towards, can you move toward the water and touch the water?
Yeah, the water is also warm too. It's not cold. It's like I'm in a summer environment.
And can you feel the wind?
No wind, but the water is like really like perfect temperature.
All right, I want you to look around back at that caduceus and see, does it lead off anywhere? Is it pointing toward a direction?
It's not, but I'm noticing that behind it, further in the distance, is like a Greek-looking temple, kind of like the Parthenon.
All right, well, why don't you start moving towards that and see if you can see any people or beings in this space.
I see a statue of Hermanubis right outside the Parthenon. It's huge. It's white, too.
Beautiful. And what's the texture of that?
Polished, clean, marble white, like really smooth, really, really smooth.
Okay, well, why don't you bow to the statue a little bit, give a little bit of an honor to it, and then move inside the temple and see if you can find anybody. And if you can't, just call out and see if something wants to come to you.
Well, yeah, there's like this flame. It's like this furnace or something in the middle of that Parthenon, and it's burning. And then when I said, is Hermanubis here? And he walked out, and now he looks like like an actual living version of the statue that I saw.
Well, ask him if he has any message for you.
All right. He said survive.
Okay. I think that's a good message.
It seems pretty straightforward to me. It's like, basically, do you have a message for me? He said survive. Just answered it in one word.
And do you feel like you could make sort of astral contact with him and have him share some energy with you, or?
Yeah, I could do that.
Would you like hold out your hands and let him put his hands on your hands?
Actually, he placed his hand on my head the way like the Pope would like put a benediction.
Okay.
On something.
Okay. Now, go ahead and feel what's coming through that.
Very cold. It's very like, it's like you're being poured cold water all over you, because the whole environment of this place was warm. But like when he placed his hand on me, it's like there's cold going all over my body from the inside.
What does his hand feel like itself?
Heavy. And it's almost like a dam that's like releasing all of this energy into me, but the energy is very, very chilled and cold. It's not warm at all. It's very, very cold. It's cool.
Well,
very, very soothing.
Since this is a potentially significant experience, just go ahead and allow that to flow for a second. I won't interrupt you for a second.
Wow.
Okay, so I want you to thank Hermanubis for this, and let's back out of this because obviously it's a little personal. So
that was amazing.
Go ahead and go back to the caduceus, and then turn around and open up your eyes back into here.
That was amazing. Thank you for that.
So I mean, just obviously you were sort of geared up for having a more significant experience. That isn't always going to happen, and nor should it be really sought out, especially initially. And I'm glad that you had that experience, because I think that people can go, oh wow, it's pretty easy to have significant experiences and recognize that, and that's really positive. But I don't want everyone to feel like, well, when I did it, I only was in this place where there were some cats and nothing interesting was going on. And that kind of stuff will happen. Not that cats aren't interesting, but having a more spiritual experience is not necessarily going to happen every single time that you use this particular exercise. But incorporating that understanding into your ritual work is an incredibly empowering thing, because suddenly you're no longer kind of dependent upon a lot of outer things, oracles and so forth. You're more in tune with exactly what's going on right here, right now.
What's this technique called again? What did you name it again?
Well, I call it visionary flow. The fellow who sort of inspired the idea to me calls it image streaming. So it's incorporated in a lot of my teaching at this point, that particular exercise, along with a bunch of other ones as well. And the thing that I noticed in a lot of occult circles was that there really isn't all that much visionary stuff going on for a lot of people. They struggle with it, and they feel like, I feel things more than I see things, and yada yada. And that's, I don't want to invalidate people's experiences, but it's so possible and not all that hard to have a much more powerful experience in all of your ritual activities. I kind of like to think of myself in a way like there are, the outer martial arts where you learn a lot of things about, different ways of punching and kicking. And then there are the inner martial arts in which you learn more things about how things are flowing within your being. And I think I'm sort of more of an inner magical practitioner and teacher. While I do outer things, I do ritual activities and so forth, my focus is really more on what's happening in consciousness. And I honestly thought that's where everybody's head was at until I realized that wasn't true. A lot of people are much more focused on
a mystic path than a magic path.
What's that?
So more of a mystic path than a magic path.
No, I don't. I mean, yes,
to an extent, but I think the internal work.
I think that's that's a limiting word for it, because mystical seems to sort of preclude one from having adventures and misadventures along the way, and I don't think that's not a part of the magical path. The inner work is more just about being attuned to what's happening at a level where you're experiencing things that are visionary, and that can be mystical, but it can also be just magical, but with a visionary component to it. Me personally, yes, I'm very much a mystical person, but I don't think that this technology, the kind of techniques that I teach, really are limited to only mystical work. They can be very practical, sort of, worldly.
No, I mean, just this particular technique is what I was talking about. It was having the internal adventures.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's one of the first things that I teach my apprentices, actually, is how to find their secret temple. It's kind of like a permanent space, even though it's always changing for them. And what's in there is always going to be different for whatever's going on. But it's kind of like an internal workshop.
Yes,
Cool.
I think that that idea has been kicking around for a while. I think that the 1970s probably was where that idea really started becoming prevalent. I had a magical teacher who was very into that. He had a very complex sort of temple sort of compound with different places you could go for different specific things. In my work, I sort of simplified that into a basic inner temple where you are, have the elemental directions, and then above you have the divine light, and yeah, you can bring whatever you want into that temple, and things appear in that temple from time to time that are based on what it is that you are, needing in your life at that moment, for sure. So yeah, I think that's a great inner way of working, and it can be combined with an outer way of working. If you set up a sort of an outer temple that in some way or another emulates your inner temple, then suddenly you have, the both planes really operating at the same time. It's funny because some folks who are really interested in like really heavily grimoire ritual magic say that, oh, Jason, you're just like a mind magician and a chaos magician and all these silly insults, and then other people who are more into that stuff say, oh, Jason, you're really into all this material stuff, you have too much, and so I end up getting sort of critiqued by both groups because I incorporate both within the work that I do.
That's how you know you're doing the right thing. When like when people criticize you politically, if all of the far left, they call, they're like, oh, you're just a neoconservative Nazi, but then like the far right, oh, you're just a gun grabbing homo, and I'm thinking like, okay, well, I'm pissing off both extremes. I'm kind of doing okay here.
Yeah, it's like what Winston Churchill said: if you haven't made any enemies, you haven't stood for anything. So anyhow, Mr. Newcomb, that technique was extraordinary. And I'm very honored to have learned it directly from you. This is something definitely that I can implement in my own evocation practices. And I'm sure that my students will love to learn this here. We're going to be making a graphic and adding this to our Instagram page, attributing the credit to you. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being our first guest for season 2, even though it was a bit glitchy at first. But before we wrap up the show, is there any kind of upcoming workshop, trainings, products that you want to plug so that people can know where to find it?
Yeah, I have a bunch of plugs. First of all, next week I'm going to be at something called StarCon in Palm Beach, Florida. That's a star with 2 A's in it. If people want to come and check out what I'm teaching and sharing there. And next month I'm going to be at Convocation in Michigan. So those are 2 places where we can hang out in live in the flesh if you want. But right now I'm doing this my crowdfunding for my dice tarot, and that's dicereading.com, and then pretty much everything else can be found at jasonaugustusnewcomb.com. That has a page that has pretty much all my other stuff in it. I'm not sure if my courses are linked there, but I'll make sure that gets updated if they aren't. I teach a bunch of online courses. This visionary stuff that we just were working on is one aspect of it, but there's quite a few other practices and really like whole approaches to things that I share I think there's about 16 courses up on that, and it's newhermetics.heightsplatform.com, but our New Hermetics Institute, but I'll send you a link to it, and I'll make sure that my Jason Augustus Newcomb link is updated so that people can find it just by going there. Thank you very much for having me. It was really fun.
It was an honor. Now, please don't leave. We're just going to end the show right now. But once we're done, we're just going to say our goodbyes. But for all of you who tuned in, once again, this is Jason Augustus Newcomb. And please support him by enrolling into his classes, purchasing his works, get that amazing PGM tarot and tarot dice deck. I mean, I'm definitely going to get my hands on one of those. And I hope to see you again later on in the season, or even in season 3 if we make it that far. So once again, this is me and Wade saying good night. I'm going to remove you from the stream right now. Wade, once again, thanks for being my co-pilot of this Millennium Falcon of the show. We're going to end the stream, but we're not going to leave the conversation. Good night, everyone.
Good night,